It's Tuesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Are large fines for water companies the wrong approach to stopping sewage discharges?
We don't only have to knock them about, we have to help them to improve.
But is this letting water companies off the hook? Also today, this man was fined after burning a copy of the Quran in London. What does it mean for free speech? Is good weather to blame for the recent high number of small boats crossing the channel?
Excuse me, do you think it's all right not to pay? Seriously, why do you go back to the barrier and pay?
Does the state need to get tougher on low-level crime? With us today, Labour MP Sarah Smith, Conservative MP and Shadow Culture Secretary Stuart Andrew, writer and broadcaster the Reverend Richard Coles, and non-affiliated peer Claire Fox. This is Politics Live. So let's start with this BBC headline, which is about the water industry. It says the failing water sector needs stronger regulation, according to a damning review. Now, this we heard from Sir John Cunliffe, who has carried out that interim review, a former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England. And he said there that we don't need to knock water companies about. On fines in particular, he said that there remains a question of how constructive they are in turning around poor performance at a time when the industry needs to attract significant investment. Sarah, coming to you, I mean, are massive fines for water companies a help or a hindrance? The public tend to like them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that they are incredibly important, and it's been really effective in terms of how we've taken a handle on the challenges that our water companies face. We know it's just not okay that these businesses have been creating huge profits and paying off huge amounts of that to their directors, whilst consumers are paying more and more each year. There's not the investment into our infrastructure that's desperately needed, and in effect, you know, they've got the best of all worlds in terms of it's a monopoly for them. There's no real competition, obviously, for water services, and so the fines are incredibly important in terms of standing up to that and starting to hold them accountable for their poor performance and behaviour with the sewage.
Is Sir John Cunliffe wrong then to say that actually they might not be the best thing to do, because it is taking money away from the companies and we're also asking them to invest, aren't we? That's a contradiction.
So the report today is on the back of the commission which the government obviously set up in order to understand how we continue the journey of reform and in order to improve water companies, how they're run, and also to tackle the absolute diabolical situation in terms of the amount of sewage that's being dumped into our lakes, our rivers and our seas. And so obviously it's, you know, taking forward what is outlined in the report and making sure that the balance is right there. But I think the, you know, ring fencing and ensuring that people can be reassured that no longer is the money they're paying for their water being paid off to directors who are failing in the delivery of the service that they are there to provide.
So Stuart, big fines, a health or a hindrance to the industry?
So I think it's a bit of both, actually, because the industry does need to realise there are consequences for not actually running their operations properly. And I think when they get those fines, or there are bans on executives, chief executives and board members from getting bonuses because they have been polluting, I think that is an important measure to have hanging over them. But of course it is also about that investment as well, which is why we required, when we were in government, this £56 billion worth of investment over a period of years, because it has to be cleaned up. And I would agree that actually there needs to be something dangling over those water bosses, that if they don't act, they're going to suffer.
Richard, lots of people get very angry about the water industry. Yeah. Thames Water's been fined, I think, over £100 million last week. Do you think it's the right thing to do?
It's galling as a consumer, I have to say, who's seen a 25% increase in my water bill, to think that not only am I having to pay out because they failed to invest in infrastructure and pay dividends to shareholders and salaries to directors instead, but now also that's going to contribute to the fine that I could quite see why the government would want, or regulators would want to use that as a kind of stick to encourage people to think more carefully about what they're doing. I don't know. I'm beginning to think that maybe with these big infrastructure organisations, some degree of state involvement might be hard to avoid. I know politically everybody hates
more money for the taxpayer.
Well, as everybody sort of hates that idea, but it's so essential. My sense is that so much of our infrastructure, water, roads, rail, is so under pressure at the moment. And you can see how, privatised rail companies, some of those are beginning to experience the hand of government in their affairs. Maybe that's something which needs to be thought about seriously.
Claire, where do you stand on this?
Yeah, I think that Richard's absolutely right. The idea that you're now having to pay more for your water and they'll use it to pay off their fines doesn't make you feel as though the fines are necessarily going to affect their behaviour. This is a much bigger problem. I think Ofwat as a regulator are pretty useless, and it drives me mad that the regulators are given huge powers and they seem to be so useless at actually enforcing anything. So that worries me. Secondly, when you actually look at it, this is a dereliction of state leadership, whichever government, by the way, that so few reservoirs have been built. The plans at the moment are, I think, that there's going to be 6 or 7 by 2050. It's like, sort of, get on with it. It's too slow. The amount of leaks, it's not, the sewage is the headline, but it's the waste of water on the way. And by the way, the water companies the other day announced that they think fitting in with the government's own environmental targets, the way to solve this is that we use less water as domestic consumers. We have smaller baths, use less water when we shower. And you do think, for God's sake, this is key national infrastructure that needs to be resolved. So I think myself, the water companies are negligent and criminally negligent, but I do think that you need the state at least to give more leadership in terms of laying down the law of what infrastructure the country needs and consumers need as well.
The industry has defended itself today, saying that they are aware of the loss of trust, which I think we can all hear here. They've apologised, 2 years ago about the sewage pollution, and they do say that their dividends are down by 2/3 compared to a couple of years ago. Let's move on and have a look at this headline, another BBC headline. Man fined for provocative Quran burning. This is the case of Hamit Koskan, who shouted abusive comments about Islam as he burned the Quran in February outside the Turkish embassy in London. Yesterday, he was found guilty at Westminster Magistrates Court of a religiously aggravated public order offence, and he received a fine. Now, after that, the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, posted this, and she said, de facto blasphemy laws will set this country on the road to ruin. This case should go to appeal. Freedom of belief and freedom not to believe are inalienable rights in Britain. Well, we are now joined by Mick Adversi, who's from the Muslim Council of Britain. Thanks very much for speaking to us today. What do you say to people like Kemi Badenoch who've suggested that this decision amounts to a de facto blasphemy law?
I think it's really important that people read the ruling. The ruling is quite clear. It makes it explicit that criticism of Islam is not an offence. In fact, even burning of the Quran is not a criminal offence in and of itself. The law is very clear on this. The judge was very clear on this. But if you decide to do something that is targeting specific people by going outside a Turkish consulate where you think there are going to be lots of Muslims, where the rationale for what you're doing is targeting Muslims in this way, then there's a problem. And this is a specific criteria that's laid out in the law, nothing to do with blasphemy. You may have a different view on whether the judge was right or wrong, but this has nothing to do with blasphemy. It's about public disorder in a way that's provocative and targeting an individual group. And that's what's happened.
Claire, what do you make of this? The judge was clear. He said it wasn't possible to separate the views about religion from the views about its followers.
Well, first of all, yes, you can, because you should be able to ridicule, mock, make fun of any religion, and that not be used interchangeably with the idea that therefore you have a prejudice against people who practice that faith, and that's of any faith. There is a danger that in this debate that there is a particular sensitivity in relation to Islam, and people are very anxious and nervous politically about criticising anybody. We know that from some of the big political issues around, for example, the rape gangs in northern towns, a huge scandal, and people said they felt they couldn't do anything because they didn't want to be accused of Islamophobia. So we know all that goes on. But I mean, in this instance, this was first of all outside the Turkish consulate, right, which is a political building. The idea that because in the Turkish consulate there will be Muslims, you can't have an act of protest is ludicrous. Secondly, the notion and the judgment is scary in this way, which is don't be provocative with your protest. Well, I mean, what's the point in protesting unless you're going to provoke someone? And then the evidence of this was that the person was both stabbed and somebody ran over them. So in other words, it's victim blaming. You're basically saying if your actions could lead to somebody else being provoked, then they shouldn't happen. And that is a terrible way for us to conduct, I mean, any discussion on speech crime. I mean, I think that there's an assault on free speech anyway. And I think that it is a backdoor route to a blasphemy law, and we should be very anxious about encouraging it.
Mikdad, what do you say to that? It's a backdoor to blasphemy laws.
It's not, because the judgment was very clear. It's nothing to do with that. I think you have to be very, very careful about mixing two things up. What the ruling is actually saying and what right-wing commentators who have a certain agenda at play, who consistently and continuously talk about Muslims in a negative way, those people and the way they're framing. I think we have to distinguish between the two. Look, this is an individual who in his interview was talking about how he thinks that 99% of rapists are Muslim. Like, this is the type of attitude that this person had. And the judge reached the conclusion that the defendant was motivated, at least in part, by hostility towards members of a particular religious group. It wasn't about Islam. The view of the judge was that the defendant was motivated, at least in part, by hostility towards Muslims. That's what's driven this. And look, we're talking about public disorder. You can have different views on where you should protest, what you can do, and I agree with that. You need to have freedom of protest. We need to have freedom of expression. We need to make sure that we're not hampering the ability for someone to have a strong and robust criticism and even be provocative about it. But if you are doing something which is likely to lead to public disorder, and you are doing so in a way that is provocative and likely to lead to disorder, and it is motivated in part by hostility towards members of a particular group, and you're doing this in the public, then obviously that's a public disorder offence, which the judge then has to define. And I don't think this has anything to do with the blasphemy law. People who are framing it as such are doing so in a way that is very divisive, problematic, and just helps fuel their own agenda, which unfortunately is something that they need to do because politically they want to try and attract certain groups to vote for them.
I have to clarify one.
Let's just let Claire come back.
I do have to clarify one thing. See, already we've got into a situation where my comments have now been seen as right-wing or far-right or some kind of provocative, divisive effect. I am making a point about free speech, and immediately you have to do that, I'm told by our guest, because you're trying to disguise your deep-seated hostility to Muslims. And of course, that is exactly what my fear is. Then the person who has committed this act we're being told that his views are the wrong kind of views. He's got unacceptable views.
Well, the judge actually said the burning of the religious book and the making of criticism of Islam were not necessarily disorderly. It was about the timing and location of the conduct and the abusive language.
I understand, but what I'm saying is we shouldn't have a situation in which somebody's views are considered in this way to be a criminal offence. That's what I'm suggesting is the danger. And I think that you can say, oh, well, burn your Quran secretly somewhere else where nobody can see it. Don't let anyone see it. I mean, if it's a protest, as an aside, this is not something that one would advocate. No one is going round here inciting people to burn Qurans. But I think you should be free to burn a Quran outside the Turkish consulate or anywhere else.
Richard, where are you on this?
Well, I think religion shouldn't be exempt from a kind of level of criticism that any other organisation would be. I think it's good for religions to make the case for themselves and also to answer their critics. But I agree with Mikdad. I think that freedom of expression is mitigated by certain factors, and one of them would be public order. So I think this is about a public order issue, not necessarily a blasphemy issue. But I'm all for people to say whatever they like, to ridicule religion, I know you have plenty of that. And of course, as Church of England, as Church of England, I'm just used to seeing people like me in situation comedy, which rather lowers the temperature.
Well, I think you were the inspiration, weren't you, for one?
Well, no, inspiration's a nice way of putting it.
Sarah, where are you on all of this? Do you think there should be laws that do prohibit the burning of religious texts?
Absolutely, there should not. And this, I very much agree that this is not about a blasphemy law. This is about whether you're inciting religious hatred, if you're motivating people to take action against a particular group or a particular religion. We are absolutely right to have existing offences which are upheld, as has happened in this situation. Unfortunately, what we have is the leader of the Conservative Party, who has nothing better to spend her time tweeting about, who sees an opportunity, who is trying to play some strange game, I think, with Nigel Farage and Reform. I do not think she'd be acting in the same way if it was a different religious book being burnt.
I'm afraid I have to totally
forward.
disagree with that, because I think if somebody had burnt the Bible, she would have said exactly the same thing, because she fundamentally, and I agree with her, believes that we've got to be careful we're not seeing sort of backdoor route into blasphemy laws. You know, I see myself as a Christian. I would hate to see someone burning a Bible, but I would defend their right to do so. Because that is the sort of country we live in, the freedom of expression. And I think Claire made a good point about the building itself.
Sorry about that.
You know, every day we go into Parliament, there are people rightly protesting about a whole range of different things, and some of it is offensive to some. Some of it is quite difficult to witness. But that's the democracy we live in, and it's right that people are able to demonstrate their views, whether we agree with them or not.
Claire, do you think that Kemi Badenoch is this a political point she's making?
No, again, it's happened, which is the assumption is that there's some sort of bad faith worry about this ruling, which, by the way, the National Secular Society have come out with, many civil liberties organisations, free speech organisations. It's not a left-right thing, and I think to try and infer that anybody who is concerned about what is a serious case, that's why it's all over the newspapers, why it's being discussed by the BBC and so on, is a matter of some concern in a country that's a free country when people are effectively being found to be criminal for doing something which could at least be seen as blasphemous. We also, and then we have this discussion, and suddenly anyone who says that is in bad faith trying to stir up hatred against Muslims. And what I'm saying is that's precisely the chilling impact that we've seen far too much in relation to any discussion or criticism of anything even tangentially related to Islam. And I think that's very nerve-wracking. That has got nothing to do with appeasing Reform, being a Tory, or any such thing. It's to do with people who care about civil liberties and free speech. And many people in the legal profession as well have said that this was a prosecution that shouldn't have occurred, and that actually there's some rows going on in the legal profession. It's not a clear-cut case that this would be found guilty. Most of the lawyers I talked to yesterday said wouldn't be found guilty.
Mick, I'll just come back on that. I mean, are you having a chilling effect on freedom of speech?
My opinion is somehow chilling someone who's in the House of Lords and publicly talking about this issue on a regular basis. I think we have to be realistic about what's happening here. There are people who are trying to stir up and incite people and divide people. This is not one of those cases. I think it's completely fair to have a discussion on burning of the Quran and the fact that it should not be something that is a core driver for a decision on free speech. I agree with having those discussions, but this is not a blasphemy law. And this idea that, you know, there is this underlying view that is being perpetrated and propagated by those in the hard right. And I'm not saying that this is the case for everybody who's on this topic today, but that they're pushing this view that Muslims are taking over, South Asians are taking over. We saw what Nigel Farage was talking about, Anas Sarwar, earlier this week. There's just misrepresentation of what's happening to try and blow into this specific narrative about Muslims and those who are different. And I think that's a dangerous narrative, and that's just not the case in this situation.
Okay.
It's dangerous to keep saying that anyone who makes any points on this is associated with the hard right. That is precisely the demonisation.
He did say it wasn't the case.
No, but actually, no, not in this instance.
You have to
but I've just mentioned the hard right lots and lots of times.
But you do have to accept that, even it is not the view for everybody, but you have to accept that you keep adding fuel to the fire of what the far right and those that have particularly
the fuel to the fire
dangerous perspectives that are driving divisions within our community and within our society. In my constituency, I've got 15% of my constituents who are Muslim, and they are living in a greater experiences of Islamophobia. They are feeling very kind of fearful of the headlines that they read, and fundamentally, I think we've got to keep understanding and reminding ourselves that in this particular incident, we are not opening up to a blasphemy law. We have very clear separation of powers. Kemi is trying to sort of politicise the judiciary, I think, which is not helpful. And absolutely that at the same time, we can protect the freedom of speech that we absolutely all uphold, but recognise that there is limits on that, because there are limits. We should not be putting other people at risk through
Claire, very briefly.
Nobody's at risk from speech, but you do have to understand that for millions of people in this country, they feel as though their rightful concerns about a range of issues, and by the way, there has been an Islamist intervention into this country which has resulted in terrorism, murder, fear, and anybody who raises some of these problems are demonised. And you've got to acknowledge that the divisive nature of this are people who say, you cannot speak your mind or say anything about this. And I use the example of the grooming gangs because often you'll hear politicians say, we have to ring-fence this idea because it's dangerous, because we don't know what the consequences will be. That is an assault on freedom of speech and freedom of conscience. And so my concern, and I think it's a perfectly reasonable one, is that we don't keep associating these views with extremist, dangerous ideas. And, you know, there are people who will say that there are organisations...
Claire, can I just... Miqdaad's got to go. Could we just have a final word from you, Miqdaad, on this?
Look, I think that we've got this really dangerous situation right now where Trumpian ideas are coming here, that free speech is a threat. This is just not true. We have a very strong state. We have freedom of speech in this country. We should really, really celebrate it. We should recognise it and not downplay our country by continuously talking about things that are just untrue. Muslims in this country are really strong, celebratory, contributory members of our society who don't think in this way. And I think it's unfair and unreasonable to always try and see Muslims as a threat. I think that's a problem. And I think that a lot of these problems are overblown and trying to play into this narrative about Muslims in society, which is very dangerous.
Thank you, Miqdaad Versi from the Muslim Council of Britain. We're going to move on now to the latest migration statistics, which have been released by the government this morning, claiming that over the past year, weather conditions have made small boat crossings more likely. Now, they refer to what they call red days, which is where the weather is calmer. And our political correspondent, Ian Watson, is joining us now. And Ian, why is the government publishing this data in this way?
Well, I think we can only speculate, of course, Vicky, but let's take a look at those local election results last month. Reform taking votes away from Labour, as well as the Conservatives. Voters getting fed up with the level of illegal immigration, and the numbers of migrants arriving in the UK is also going up this year compared to last year. So I think the government is now attempting to put all of this in context. So, for example, in the year to April 2025, the number of arrivals was around 40,000. That was up from 31,000 the previous year, an increase of around a third. But the number of so-called red days, these days which make conditions in Channel make crossings far more likely, these red days almost doubled to 190. So the government's argument would be, given that there are more favourable conditions for crossing the Channel, it's remarkable that in fact the number of migrants arriving only went up by a third and didn't almost double. Now, that is certainly an argument, but I think the political danger for the government is that voters will remain focused on the overall numbers rather than focused on the weather.
OK, Ian, thank you very much. So, Sarah, this is the government blaming boat crossings on sunshine.
It's deeply concerning, clearly, to see increased in numbers coming in on small boats, and it's an issue that the government is taking incredibly seriously and looking to tackle in a way that hasn't been taken seriously, I think, for a very long time. Obviously, scrapping the absolute waste of Rwanda, which never even took off, and I think got 2 volunteers or whatever out there, and redirecting the resources to some strategies that actually go to the source of the problem. So smashing the criminal gangs, getting the counter-terror powers for the border command. And we've seen 30,000 people returned so far this year, which is a huge increase on the returns under the previous government. But clearly, we've not cracked it yet, and it's not an easy situation. It's not an easy problem to solve because people are making a lot of money out of this, and finding the roots of where those people are is a huge international effort, and that's where the Home Secretary is, focusing the efforts with international partners.
So, Stuart, I mean, we all know that the weather has been much more calm this year. You would have expected the numbers to be even higher, wouldn't you?
Well, look, I think the trouble is the numbers are way too high anyway. This is a major problem that people on the doorsteps are certainly raising consistently with me and have done for a good number of years. And I'm afraid that, you know, I think we need some greater deterrence than we've had. And that's why, you know, at first, the Rwanda thing, I thought, is this something that is really going to be feasible? But I genuinely believe that had it been allowed to run its course, it would have made a significant difference, because when people realise that they're going to get on those boats, but they're going to get sent straight down to Rwanda, it would have been a deterrent. Now, I remember spending time volunteering in a Syrian refugee camp in southern Turkey. And actually, the people there themselves were saying to me, can you do something about these? Because our family members are going off and they're risking their lives. So there is a moral obligation for us to sort this out. But unless there is a proper deterrent, I fear these numbers are going to go up, not just because the sun is shining, but because they don't feel that there is this deterrent in place. And,
so,
you know,
Sarah,
why is it that Germany
what
is
should the
thinking of
deterrent
doing it?
be?
So you are not going to stop people making huge amounts of money with any just with a deterrent. Like, you know what I mean? The simple ways of kind of.
But if the people didn't want to come here, then there would be no trade.
But currently, they already, you know what I mean? Like, in terms of what they're willing to risk to get here, I think getting the returns to be operating properly, so that they go back to their country of origin, and improving the speed of that system is really, really important. It's important to note that we've already shut about 23 of the asylum hotels, so we are doing a lot more in the system than the previous government. And we obviously know that over 1 million people came into the country in the last year of the Conservative government because they'd completely lost control of our borders. But, you know, it's the cross-country working. But it is the only solution to this is that international effort to find the people who are running these criminal gangs and to prosecute them and to make sure that they stop their trade, and to make it so difficult that even if they are continuing to trade, they send them to countries other than the UK, and that is the focus of the strategy.
Richard, do you think the public are convinced that the government's got a handle on this?
No, I think it feels out of control. Clearly, net migration is way too high, and it's something which really moves people and frustrates people. I mean, I would like to think there would be a better way of integrating policy to make a more meaningful intervention earlier in the supply chain, is the wrong sort of word, but you know what I mean? Work more closely with other governments to make it that the UK is not the last stop for people who are entirely understandably trying to flee circumstances of unimaginable hardship or looking for opportunity in life. Why are we not better, I think, at intervening earlier in that journey to make it, to produce less pressure on our borders? An easy thing to say, politically extremely difficult.
Have you got an answer to that?
That absolutely, I think, is the ambition, and the current focus is not just absolutely looking at the how we hold these people accountable that are in the trade of people trafficking, but also arrangements with other countries. And this is also where the wider kind of soft power of the UK is very, very important in looking at the causes for people wanting to come here in the first place and being proactive in trying to stop some of that, but also being very clear that there are implications for countries that are not doing all it is within their power to stop people leaving in the first place. And we are starting to enter into using that as one of our sort of negotiation tools on other elements, be it trade or...
Richard? I think we need to evolve a new kind of language, a new kind of discourse as well, because so often people are involved in this too easily demonised that we fall into too polarised a debate. I think we just need to be practical about it and deal with the reality of what it's like for those people, what they need and where they're coming, and also what our capacity is to absorb, because clearly our public services are absolutely stretched to busting. And I find public impatience with it kind of concerns me, because I think it leads to a sort of frustration in society that's bad for everyone.
But it's had a completely detrimental impact on the trust in politicians. I mean, there is no control of our borders. That's why we're seeing widespread disillusion with the mainstream parties. And I do think that the pull factors mean that people think that if they can get here, even if they have to risk their lives, that they won't ever leave. That they won't, I mean, they won't be in a hotel, but they will be put up in houses that has been taken over and joint occupancy and so on. They will be looked after. They will get welfare services and so on. So the pull factors are enormous. And I think that the political will doesn't appear to be there to take control of the borders. A lot of rhetoric from both parties, but nothing has changed. And I think that the thing that we haven't mentioned, but which we should mention, is there is this problem of international agreements. The EHRC, I mean, whether we like it or not, the International...
European Convention on
sorry,
Human
the
Rights.
ECHR, ludicrous, ridiculous, and the government admit this, situations where you can't deport people, or where in fact you're told that through this international convention you're not allowed to be able to deal with your own borders. And I think that my concern is that there will be a backlash, there inevitably is a backlash against individuals when it appears that there's no control, and when constantly you're being told, by the way, if you vote for us we will take control. I do not think that smashing the gangs has been anything like a successful strategy. It sounds like we're going to smash the drug gangs, you know, it's like that worked, very good. I mean, it just doesn't affect deeply the way that we view the issue of migration. And I think that we did have an impressive or controversial speech from the Prime Minister about, you know, strangers in our own land, as he said, you know, massively important speech about we take this issue seriously. And it's like, we never heard any more since. That speech is like, tick that box. Maybe that will keep the reform voters happy.
This is an accusation.
Maybe it's a Trumpian moment.
But both
I think it's
politicians
not serious
here.
Politicians.
This is an accusation against both of you that there isn't the political will to deal with it, that your party didn't deal with it. And what do you say to that? That there's strong words, it's rhetoric.
So a number of things. I think firstly that we know net migration is down by half last year, which means that there is
That's the legal,
progress.
just to be clear, that's the legal migration.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But still, to say that there is no control over our borders, there is no control over who's coming to this country is not true. Like, that is, you know, rhetoric being proposed, but it's not actually the facts of the situation. And of course, the way that politics works is that there's a lot of work that goes on every single day in government that is not just about big speeches. And so just because Keir's only done one speech 3 weeks ago on it does not mean that it's not a continuing strategy, priority for the government. And it always has been. It's been, you know, one of our three underpinning non-negotiables is borders, police and safer streets, and the economy and economic growth. And, you know, it does take time to sort of turn the ship and to seriously engage on how we do actually tackle the gangs.
And Stuart, your government didn't turn the ship in all that time. What do you say?
Well, look, I hold my hands up. There was absolutely more that we could and should have done. But there were some successes, of course. We saw a 90% reduction in Albanians crossing the Channel because of the agreements that we made. We were starting to see intel that people were starting to think twice about coming here because of that Rwanda policy. But yes, there was more that we should have done. But that's why we are tabling amendments to the bill that the government have brought forward, which will make sure that we can properly deport foreign criminals.
But there are many in your party who think that actually leaving the European Convention on Human Rights is
well, we're putting out an amendment to disapply the Human Rights Act so that there can't be that challenge in the courts. And I think that's where people get frustrated because they think, you know, we're not able to manage it. And that's why we're making these amendments to the bill that's going through Parliament.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see more of this as well. I think as the world grows increasingly unstable, I think you're going to see more populations on the move, more pressure on the borders of places where people want to live. So I think.
But it was quite interesting. A French politician the other day said, well, actually, we can't keep them in France because they all want to go to England because they know that if they get to the UK, they won't ever leave. Right? And she said, you've got huge pull factors, you aren't dealing with it. And I think we have to be honest. I mean, to say we've halved it, it's all been tackled. I mean, that kind of... But I'm just saying there is a particular version of events which is, don't worry, we'll sort it out. And it's not what anyone's experience of real life is like.
OK, thank you. And a reminder that we are on an hour earlier tomorrow for Prime Minister's Questions, where this could well be one of the subjects that comes up. You can get that and all the build-up here on BBC Two from 11:15. Now, let's have a look at this. This is the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, from last week. He put this video out showing him in a London Underground station confronting fare dodgers.
Excuse me, do you think it's all right not to pay? Seriously, why do you go back through the barrier and pay? Do you want to go back and pay like everybody else? Do you think it's all right not to pay? Why don't you go back and pay? You can say as much as you want, but everyone else has to pay. You're carrying a knife, you say? Nearly 1 in 25 people using London's public transport aren't paying for it. So there's 8 officers down there, but 1 minute away, that gate's wide open. It's also just annoying watching so many people break the law and get away with it.
Or at least most of it.
Right, should we go over here to these guys here? Excuse me, gents. Hello. You're on camera, mate. You're bang to rights.
Just step to the side and...
All right, thanks very much, guys. It's the same with bike theft, phone theft, tool theft, shoplifting, drugs in town centres, weird Turkish barber shops. It's all chipping away at society. The state needs to reassert itself and go after lawbreakers.
So, Sarah, do you think he's right that the state needs to reassert itself? I mean, he's tapping into something there, isn't he? The feeling of unfairness that people feel?
Absolutely, and I am equally angry, particularly for my constituency in Hyndburn. We've faced huge challenges around antisocial behaviour, as well as break-ins in some of our shops. It's been really devastating for my small business owners. And there is no doubt that, you know, again, after 14 years of failure, the police are not in the situation that they were before, and there isn't the necessary resources in there to be able to tackle this and get people behind bars fundamentally when they commit crimes. However, you know, I think this video possibly shows Jenrick doing something else, which comes back to the earlier point as to, is this some sort of faux leadership campaign video and him trying to get as much attention as he can on himself? Or is he really serious about the problem? Because he himself has cost taxpayers money. Could be both, of course. He cost taxpayers money when he was found using the state-funded car when he couldn't drive, when he'd broken the speed limit. So he seems to sort of have double standards here in terms of what he's demanding of other people. I think also to say that, you know, I think since 2010, about £1 billion of investment has been taken out of TfL under the last Conservative government. And so there are less resources as well to go after fare dodgers. But the levels of fare dodging is not acceptable, however, much lower than in some other countries like the US, where it's about 10% higher.
Stuart, firstly, what's Robert Jenrick up to there?
Well,
leadership challenge?
No, I find it really odd that people think that the Shadow Justice Secretary shouldn't be highlighting where people are breaking the law. I mean, that's his job, and he's done it, I think, very, very effectively, because there is nothing more frustrating than when you get to those barriers and you see someone in front of you just either try and come in behind you on the price you have paid, because we know that that is a huge amount of lost revenue. I think TfL themselves say it's about £100 million a year that's being lost. So good on him for highlighting this. It's just a shame that the Labour mayor of London had to resort to sort of personal attacks on him. You know, I just think that was...
We're going to come to that. So this was Sadiq Khan in his response, you know, hitting back and saying actually that the Tory government had taken billions of pounds out of the police budget. But in saying that, he said it's an example of the chutzpah of Mr. Ozempic, which is a weight loss drug, and obviously suggesting there Robert Jenrick has lost some weight. He's previously talked about that. Which is a bit insulting, do you think, Richard?
I have to declare an interest. I, too, am on something like Ozempic Mounjaro. This is not because I have political ambitions, I think.
This is your bid for leadership.
But I would say, if that isn't a man on manoeuvres, I don't know what a man on manoeuvres looks like. I think it's amazing how much traction it got, how much
What did you think when you saw it?
I thought it was a very effective piece of politicking, actually. I thought... There's a broader point, he makes it at the end, that it's part of a kind of culture of lawlessness that seems to spread. I think that's a riskier thing for him to argue, because if you look at successive governments' underinvestment, it seems to be in the police service and in the criminal justice system, go to any town centre, go to, I mean, there's a co-op near me where effectively people come in and just help themselves because there's not an effective way of... I think people have no confidence that the police will investigate or the courts will get there. So I think it's a broader problem than just fare dodging on TfL. But there's a new video from Mr. Jenrick today, actually, in which he has a pop at Lord Hermer, the new Attorney General, which I think is a less satisfactory piece of work. But anyway.
OK. Claire, do you think that he's tapping into something there?
I don't think this has got anything to do with Jenrick, by the way. I don't want to focus on that. It's the issue. And I think there is a sense in which people feel and experience a collapse of the social contract. You know, it's not just on the tube, by the way, it's on the buses. It is, you know, standing in front of, you know, trying to choose, can I afford to buy that piece of meat? And somebody just walks out, puts it in their bag and walks out the shop. I mean, you think, what, am I a fool? And it's horrible when you're on the tube and somebody pushes past you in those big barriers. And by the way, I don't think it's a resources question, because when it's happened to me, there's loads of staff just standing there, just look the other way, right? This is not just, things are not always to do with money and resources. They're to do with a crisis of adult authority in many instances, and a problem in which we kind of feel as though we should make excuses. Because one of the things that was most horrible about this was the number of people who came out and said, this is a Tory stunt, he's on the news, blah, 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 Mr Ozempic. I mean, what kind of a sneer is that? I mean, great that we've got Ozempic and people lose weight.
I mean, Sarah, do you think that was appropriate from Sadiq Khan?
But the question is surely, why is it that this is happening in our streets in London and people are made to feel diminished? And then other people attacking him said, these are poor people. This is what working class lives are like, that they can't afford the fares. And you think, what a disparagingly patronising view of working people who actually may have no money but never break the law. And these are very often young people who we've socialised into believing that there will be no consequences for them barging past the rules. And we should tell them there are.
So I just want to pick up on this, because this is the Mayor of London, you know, he's in a senior position here, saying Mr Ozempic. I mean, he wouldn't have got away with that if he was talking about a woman, would he? That's just a personal insult, isn't it?
I just don't think that Robert Jenrick is going to be of the snowflake generation that it really bothers him whether he's had that label thrown at him, whether it is, you know, things do get said in the heat of discussion, of course it does.
Come on, if someone had said that about Sadiq Khan, he'd be all over the airwaves going, how outrageous this is. The double standards on this is just unbelievable, because if it had been a Tory politician saying something like that about a Labour...
I'm just not sure it's a slight. I feel like so many people are on it, like, let mission to lose weight.
Just ask, is it really that offensive?
Point, actually, because this is actually, I think this is a great thing, because there are so many people who have struggled with their weight over years, and this is really helping them to sort of get that weight loss and feel healthier and better. So why try and make it a sort of stigma thing?
I mean, you're right, lots of people go on.
One with a sort of slightly dog whistle element to it. Maybe it's a sort of metropolitan elite accusation that sneaked in behind that he can afford to... Well, exactly. Although, you know, I would say, like lots of people, I got to a stage where I was pre-diabetic, and my lifestyle made it very difficult for me to get on top of that. And so Ozempic, well, the one similar to it, has made my life much easier. Indeed, 500,000 people, I think, have...
Well, there's a lot of people on it, and not many are getting it on the NHS, I think. They are having to pay for it.
That's right. I go through that reliable source, the internet, to get mine. But
loads of people do it, but isn't it marvellous that the drug exists, and then we can have a campaign if we think the NHS can afford it, that more people can get it? I think that's true.
Well, that is a good point about that.
But I don't want to entirely, but I do think that one thing that was just said, I do think that it was a bit of a sneer, because I actually think that it would have been so much better if Sadiq Khan had actually said, I absolutely agree with you, Mr Jenrick. I mean, this is what people might want from politicians, right? You're so right. I've seen these things happening in the streets of London, and I'm going to tackle it. I'm not sort of like, oh, you've made a stupid video, you're not serious. I mean, my goodness me, the Mayor has been known to indulge in the odd stunt, the odd publicity stunt at that. But what I think we should go back to is to remember this. When you were saying the police aren't picking things up, I would say there's a slogan which is, police our streets, not our tweets. And I think that's really true, is that we're worried that the police are not taking seriously the everyday crimes that people encounter.
Sarah,
that would be something
the Mayor
should have
taken it more seriously. What do you say to that?
I think that we have to police both, because I think to suggest that what goes on online is not linked to real life and doesn't actually have real life implications and actually threaten people, you know, in their physical safety is not true. And I've seen it with constituents, and as well, a lot of politicians themselves have been victim to this. And so I believe that it's absolutely important that we have the resources to look seriously at both, because if people are utilising social media to incite hatred and put other people at risk, then there should be the right policing around that. And that sits, and it should not be either or. And actually, the police in my constituency still spend as much time as certainly more time on policing our streets and doing the important day-to-day of the beat.
Thank you very much. That's all for today, but we'll be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 11:15.